Good evening. Thank you all for braving the cold and coming out tonight. Good evening and welcome to the Ford Museum. My name is Kristen Mooney, and I'm the Public Affairs Specialist for both the library and museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening. Tonight's program is brought to you by the National Archives and Records Administration with additional support from the Ford Presidential Foundation. We are very grateful for the foundation and all of you who are members of the Friends of Ford program. It's your ongoing support that makes possible our feature exhibits, research travel grants, and educational activities and events like tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to ask that you silence your cell phones and turn off any other electronic devices, and I'll be in the booth later to make the echo stop. Prior to introducing our speaker, I'd like to provide you with a few information about some upcoming events and exhibits. In Grand Rapids, our holiday tradition continues with the former train shown at the Breton Village Mall. New additions this year include Congressman Ford's Quonset Hunt, the Patland Hotel, the Fort Painted Varnish Company, as well as the Big Top Circus. Many thanks to our countless volunteers who made this display possible. It's truly a delight. As a gift to the city, the museum and the train will be free during Christmas break this year. So mark your calendars, December 23rd through January 5th, and bring your children down and grandchildren as well. Looking ahead, our next featured exhibit will be The Continual Struggle, and that's images by Brian Washington. The exhibit depicts the pain, sacrifice, and emotion of those who fought for freedom during the Civil Rights Movement. It includes 23 images, and they will be on display upstairs. In Ann Arbor, we have some modern quilts and traditional quilts decorating the lobby for the holiday season. Those will be up through January. And opening later this month is Extraordinary Circumstances, and that's going to be a reprise of the exhibit that was on display here. So if you missed it in Grand Rapids, feel free to head over to Ann Arbor and you'll be able to see it there. Handouts are available outside, as well as a survey about tonight's program. If you didn't grab one, feel free to do so and let us know how we're doing. And now on to tonight's program. It is a pleasure to welcome Mary Evans Seeley to our stage. Mrs. Seeley is a collector, historian, lecturer, author, and publisher of 2 books about White House Christmases. She and her husband, Ron, who is here tonight as well, have the most extensive collection of presidential Christmas memorabilia in the country. Parts of the Seeley Collection have been on display at various presidential libraries. And if you recall, we had part of her collection here when we showed the White House in miniature. Encouraged by White House curator Rex Scouten to write season's greetings, Mrs. Seeley visited presidential libraries and birthplaces, met with various presidents and first ladies, including our own Betty Ford. She received communications from Lady Bird Johnson, the Clinton White House, and also the office of Melania Trump. Her book, Season's Greetings, is now in its 8th and final edition. It tells stories of Christmas from the White House from President Coolidge through President Trump, documenting nearly a century of presidential Christmases. We are in for a true treat this evening. Please join me in welcoming Mary to our stage.
Many people have apologized for bringing us from Florida to Michigan weather. But in a way, it's very nostalgic. You know, I'll be home for Christmas. Ron and I are both from the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin. He grew up in Nebraska. So it's kind of a nostalgic time for us to come back, even though our parents are gone. But it is a pleasure for us to be here tonight. So thank you. It has, as Kristen said, it has been my honor and privilege to be able to have an interview or interaction with 8 of the First Ladies in the writing of my book, Season's Greetings from the White House. And that's a big step for a farm girl from Wisconsin. Mrs. Ford was one that I interviewed, and she was very gracious very down to earth and open. We had a delightful visit. And there are 4 key words that I remember from that Ford interview. One was family, a family that skis together, stays together. Another is familiar. The Fords had the advantage of being in Washington 25 years before they went to the White House. So they were very familiar with what goes on in the White House. Another was fun. Mrs. Ford said, when I go to the White House, I want to make it fun. And then the 4th is favorite. She shared with me her favorite Christmas in the White House. And also, one of my favorite stories in the whole book comes from the Ford administration. It was the gift print of 1976, the background of which Mrs. Ford was not familiar, and so I shared it with her, and I'll share it with you a little bit later in my talk. So Ron and I are honored to be here as part of your Christmas celebration at the Ford Museum. We had a chance to walk around this afternoon. You did a wonderful job, and presidential libraries are just a treasure of history, and I hope you appreciate it. I'm sure you do, and couldn't get to other presidential libraries as well. To begin with, I want to give you a little background of Christmas in the White House. You know, George Washington did not live in the White House. He lived in New York, but he started a tradition of New Year's Day receptions. And that New Year's Day reception was carried forth by John Adams when he moved to the White House in 1801, and thus started a social custom in the nation's capital. And everyone could go to shake hands with the president on New Year's Day. From the common folk to the highest ranking diplomat, they were welcome, but they were scheduled in the order of their prominence. So diplomats and government officials were first, and then came the military. And by 1930, the crowds grew to more than 6,000 men, women, and children standing in line on January 1st. So it was not Christmas, but it was a New Year's Day reception. That was the major event in the social life of Washington for 130 years, from 1801 until 1932, when the Hoovers had enough and they went on vacation, a holiday vacation. John Coolidge told me when I interviewed him, he said that his mother's hands became so swollen that her gloves had to be cut off after the reception. In early America, Christmas was a regular workday. It was not until after the Civil War that Christmas became a federal holiday during the Grant administration. And then a decade later, in 1879, Christmas cards were introduced in America by Louis Prang, a German card maker. Then a decade later, Benjamin Harrison introduced the first Christmas tree. Frances Cleveland added electric lights to the joy of her grandchildren. And 20 years later, President Wilson requested that a Christmas tree be placed on the Capitol grounds in 1913. And then 10 years after that, it was the director of the DC Public Schools that suggested erecting a Christmas tree on White House grounds and having the president come and light the tree. So Calvin Coolidge was the first president to light the national Christmas tree. That is where my book begins, and that is where our journey begins tonight. So on Christmas Eve in 1923, the Coolidges participated in several of the events of that tree lighting. At 5 o'clock, they walked to the ellipse, and the president lit the national tree with his foot. He did not give a speech at that time, but there was a choir from the Epiphany Church that led the crowd in Christmas carols. At 7 o'clock, the Marine Band put on a concert of holiday music. And then at 9 o'clock, Grace Coolidge had invited 65 members of First Congregational Church, her church, to sing Christmas carols on the steps of the White House. And the Evening Star printed the words of the carols in the order that they would be sung and suggested that this newspaper clipping be brought, and also with a light so that they could see the words to the carols, and sing along. And the newspaper reported that about 10,000 people came to the White House that first Christmas Eve. And then a few days later, 6,000 more people showed up on New Year's Day for that reception. Finally, in 1927, Calvin Coolidge wrote out a Christmas message in longhand. He never did speak at the tree lighting ceremony, but he wrote this out, and it appeared in major newspapers across the nation. And then it came to us. We found it in a garage sale in calligraphy, and it says, "Christmas is not a time or a season, but a state of mind. To cherish peace and goodwill, to be plenteous in mercy, is to have the real spirit of Christmas. If we think on these things, there will be born in us a Savior, and over us all will shine a star, sending its gleam of hope to the world." Franklin Roosevelt's message at the lighting of the National Christmas tree was much longer, and it read like a State of the Union address. Early in his administration, the Roosevelt family would meet together for a 3-day festival, and the president would normally dramatize and read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and they had a great time. By 1936, world events cast a shadow over their holidays. Christmas cards became simple, with this little red barn that appears on the president's card from 1936 until 1941. It was in 1941, of course, December 7th, that Pearl Harbor was attacked, and within days, the United States was involved in World War II. Winston Churchill came to the White House, and he and the president spoke at the tree lighting ceremony, witnessed by 15,000 to 20,000 people in 1941. The president gave an appeal for a preparation of Americans' hearts and a proclamation of prayer. Winston Churchill expressed a pleasure in being able to speak to the American people on Christmas Eve. He addressed them as fellow workers in the cause of freedom. After 1941, Christmases weren't very cheerful. Eleanor Roosevelt said that her mother-in-law had passed away. She had 4 sons in different theaters of the war. The 3-day celebrations that they once enjoyed never were to be again. And unknown at the time, 1941 would be the last time that President Roosevelt would push the button to light the national Christmas tree in Washington, D.C. Because of the demands of war, the electric lights had to be eliminated. And in fact, in 1943, the Board of Commissioners even recommended that the national tree be abandoned altogether to conserve resources. And it was the First Lady who interceded to save this 20-year tradition. She appealed to the board. She said, "Unless it is absolutely necessary to abolish the custom, Americans have sacrificed so much, and the ceremony at the national Christmas tree is the only real holiday that they had left." And so the tree was spared. School children made ornaments out of paper and dedicated to a loved one in the war. The lights were eliminated, and after 10 years, the president went back to Hyde Park, and he did continue his messages on Christmas Eve, but it was from Hyde Park. Well, in 1944, the president, who was also a father with 4 sons in the war, delivered a heartfelt prayer on June 6th, 1944, the D-Day prayer. And this year, we've celebrated the 75th anniversary of D-Day, and that prayer was so incredible that a document was given in the form of a scroll to his staff at Christmas time, 6 months later. It was also made into a book and given to his executive staff and to his family. The 1944 Christmas card read, "Best wishes for a happier 1945." Well, the war took its toll on President Roosevelt. He longed for lasting peace. He died in April, never knowing how close the nation was to peace. Harry Truman had only been vice president for 83 days when Roosevelt died, and he became president at a very crucial time. He made the decision about bombing of Hiroshima in Japan. The Trumans moved into the White House on May 7th, and the following day was very historic and memorable. It was that day, on May 8th, that Germany surrendered unconditionally to end the war in Europe. They had a reproduction of the VE Day document that was given as a Christmas gift to his staff, and to one of his cabinet members, he said, "This is a Merry Christmas to you, and it's a happy birthday to me," because his birthday was, his 61st birthday was on May 8th. The Allied commander of that great war was Dwight Eisenhower. And if ever there was a president who took a personal interest in the cards and gifts that were sent from the White House, it was Dwight Eisenhower, who called upon his friend and Christmas card expert, Joyce C. Hall, who was president of Hallmark Cards. When General Eisenhower was president of Columbia University, he took up painting. He didn't think his work was very good. Mr. Hall disagreed, and he asked him if Hallmark could reproduce some of his paintings to give out as Christmas gifts. So first, in 1953, Abraham Lincoln became a gift print for his friends and employees. The following year, his gift was a painting of George Washington taken after Gilbert Stuart's famous work. Other gifts included a painting of a deserted barn. In 1959, he painted a rocky butte in Canada that was renamed Mount Eisenhower. And his last painting was of a church in Bavaria that he obviously had seen during the war. Well, Mamie Eisenhower loved Christmas. She loved giving cards and gifts all through the year, whether it be birthdays or babies or whatever. And so when I interviewed her social secretary, Mary Jane McCaffrey, she handed me an envelope with 38 Christmas cards that the Eisenhowers had given in 8 years. Do the math, that's more than 4 cards a year. They designed an official White House card, an official gift enclosure that went with their gifts, a personal Christmas card, which one of them on the golf cart was. There was a Mamie Bangs card, that was her signature, that was given, and even a contemporary card of them in a Santa Claus suit. So the Eisenhowers were credited with initiating the tradition of presidential Christmas cards as we know them today. They were like a 5x7 size, could put through the mail. Their Christmas card list went from 1,000 to 3,000 people. It included a presidential seal on every card with the word Season's Greetings, and thus the title of my book, Season's Greetings from the White House. Now, in contrast, John F. Kennedy decided not to send Christmas cards. He planned to send telegrams until the CFO told him how much that was going to cost to send them around the world. So Hallmark came to the rescue with a card very similar to the Eisenhowers, a green card with a seal and Season's Greetings. John F. Kennedy brought a young family to the White House. His gift to his staff that first year was a photo of Caroline's ducks swimming in the White House fountain on the South Lawn. Their second Christmas card was a photo of Caroline's pony, Macaroni, pulling a sleigh with Mrs. Kennedy and Caroline and a friend across the South Lawn. Their final Christmas card was also that of a child, the baby Jesus. The photo of the nativity scene that was in the East Room of the White House, the creche, had been on loan to the White House, and that's what they chose for their 1963 card. Before going to Dallas, the President and First Lady began signing about 30 of the Christmas cards. He signed in black ink, she signed in blue ink, and they thought, we will finish this later. Well, after the assassination on November 22nd, President Johnson took over. The Kennedy staff left abruptly. The signed cards were thrown in a box and did not resurface again until 1985, 34 years ago. And so it was this 1963 Kennedy Christmas card that was signed but never sent is one of the most valuable of all presidential Christmas memorabilia. In May of 1996, my first book was ready to go to print. And I had a call from a friend in Washington, and she said, "Mary, I just read this article about a 1963 Johnson Christmas card." This was in May. I said, a 1963, I designated that as the Kennedy card. So I called, and I had assigned the 1964 card to Johnson as their first card. It was this black and white rendering of the President's Park. So I called the Johnson Library, and I learned that on November 27th, 1963, the chief of protocol at the State Department sent a memorandum to the new president. And he says, "Unless you and Mrs. Johnson prefer not to do so this year, I recommend that you send holiday greeting cards to top government officials, especially any foreign chiefs of staff with whom the United States had a relationship, foreign ministers and heads of governments that President Johnson has personally met." Well, his chief of staff approved the recommendation on December 1st and sent the appropriate lists to the White House. Hallmark, again, came to the rescue, and they had just shipped the rest of the Kresh cards to the White House on November 22nd. And so they were requested again to make an appropriate card of that was appropriate for such a time as this. It was a simple white card with an embossed presidential seal and a red border. I made the correction to the LBJ chapter, sent it to the printer in 1996. And so the following cards for LBJ were a little bit different. First of all, they changed the manufacturer of the print of the Christmas cards from Hallmark to American Greetings. And then they really liked the work of one artist at American Greetings by the name of Robert Lasik. His watercolors appeared on every card and gift print since. And this was one in 1967. He did an interior of the Blue Room Christmas tree. In 1968, he did an exterior, which was Mrs. Johnson's favorite view from the White House in spring. Now, what I learned about these two rare Christmas cards was the importance of traditions at the White House. The New Year's Day reception lasted 130 years. The lighting of the National Christmas tree was cut back, but it was never closed down. And during the Carter administration, when we had hostages in Iran, only the star at the top was lit. And then last Thursday, President Trump lit the National Christmas tree for the 96th tree lighting ceremony in Washington, D.C. The traditions hold. The tradition of sending official presidential Christmas cards has never been interrupted due to war, due to the death of a president, or a holiday deadline that was late for nearly 90 years, dating back to the small Christmas cards that FDR sent. And speaking of White House traditions, President and Mrs. Nixon introduced a few of their own. The Nixons started the tradition of hosting candlelight tours of the White House their first Christmas in the White House. Pat Nixon loved to decorate. She said you can never decorate too much at Christmas time. And one of her most unique ideas was having the pastry chef create the first gingerbread house in the president's house. It was a 3-foot A-frame gingerbread house, and that was her signature style while her time there. Now, over the years, the gingerbread house has changed shape. It's gained weight, and but the idea and the tradition stemmed back 50 years to Pat Nixon. Now, President Nixon added his personal touch with gifts featuring 5 presidents that he gave away to his White House staff as their Christmas gifts. And each president came in a velour commemorative folder, either red or white or blue or green. It was followed by a parchment page that describe the portraits of the presidents Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and James Monroe. Each had a brass-like plate that identified the president. They're a little bit hard to frame, but that was what he chose. And this collection has great significance to my husband and I, because Ron was at a medical meeting in Washington, D.C., and he went out looking for a donut or trouble or something, and he went into this political memorabilia shop, and the first purchase that he made was a President Nixon red velour folder of George Washington. And so that purchase has changed our life these past 30 years. Well, Gerald Ford went to Washington first as a senior in high school, and then he returned as your representative of Michigan's 5th Congressional District during the Truman era. He served as the 40th Vice President and became the 38th President on August 9th, 1974. Gerald Ford had served in Congress for 25 years and was very familiar with the political life in Washington. And Mrs. Ford told me, she said, his dedication to the country rubbed off on me. And so her desire during her time at the White House was to depict an American theme and portray American arts and crafts. Now, preparing for Christmas would be a challenge for any administration, but especially if you came into the office at the end of summer. Despite the turmoil of Watergate, plus major surgery for the First Lady in September, Betty Ford's outlook was very courageous. The Fords had attended many White House parties, and so they were familiar with what went on at Christmas time, and this was to their great advantage. Mrs. Ford also had a wonderful staff to assist her. She could rely upon them, she could learn from them, and so in November they came to her and said, now, what do you want us to share about you at Christmas? And she said, well, for many years our family always enjoys going together and skiing in the mountains of Colorado, and so snow was a key factor that brought them much joy at Christmas time. So the staff, creative staff, gathered winter snow scenes of America from the White House collection, and so it was no surprise that the Fords chose gift prints depicting snow. In fact, they chose a snow scene for every year by the same artist, George Dury. In 1974, their gift to their staff was this New England snow scene by George Dury. The next year, their official Christmas card was Farmyard by George Dury. And in 1976, their Christmas card featured George Dury's native Connecticut entitled Going to Church. And so that completed their trio of snow scenes. Now, decorating the White House for Christmas emphasized simplicity and thrift amidst a recession that was going on. Mrs. Ford chose an old-fashioned handmade theme. Patchwork ornaments were made by various craft groups, and even Susan Ford went to her sewing basket and got out some scraps and made some patchwork ornaments as well. And then they also printed a little brochure where we at home could also make patchwork ornaments for our tree during this time of thrift. Well, while the White House looked very festive at Christmas time, Mrs. Ford thought, this is a great time to entertain. I want to make our time here fun. You know, the country is in need of that. We've gone through a traumatic, difficult time. Let's have some fun. So the Fords started a new tradition, and they hosted the first annual Christmas ball for the cabinet and members of Congress. The black tie gala was held right after the tree lighting ceremony. They dispensed with protocol. The 900 guests included both sides of the aisle because Jerry Ford had had worked with these men and women throughout his 25 years in Congress. It was very lighthearted, she said. It was healthy. It was fun for all of us. Well, Betty Ford loved the Christmas of 1975. That would be her favorite, getting ready for the bicentennial and getting people in the spirit for July of 1976. So she and her team started early. They made several trips to Williamsburg to get ideas. The theme was early Americana. They decorated the White House with natural materials such as leaves, pomegranates, red pepper pods, pine cones, acorns, dried fruits, and flowers replaced sequins and glitter, preserving a theme steeped in heritage and tradition. She said, I loved every minute that I was there. She said the bicentennial was a wonderful, historically exciting time in our history. And she said, looking back, I remember that it was very demanding, but very interesting. She described it as a revolving door of heads of state that came and left. One left and the next official arrived. She said, I never expected to meet so many heads of state, emperors. The Shah of Iran came to pay respect to our country. The Queen's visit on the actual celebration was icing on the cake. Well, my favorite story coming out of the bicentennial was the story about the art that was reproduced as a gift for President and Mrs. Ford they gave at Christmas of 1976. It is entitled Philadelphia, 1858. And the history of this piece is very fascinating. I shared some of the details with Mrs. Ford. They were unknown to her. And I'm only going to give you just a brief history. You can read about it on page 140 of my book. The art was painted by an Englishman while he was in America. He finished it in England, sold it to an art collector from India. When this Indian's estate was eventually liquidated, a New York antique dealer by the name of Albert Nestle recognized this piece, this art. It was rolled up on a dirt floor, and he described it to the White House curator as in shocking condition. But he recognized the people, the background. It must be colonial America. So he bought it. He paid $7, and he shipped it back to the United States. He shipped it to New York with the rest of his purchases. And when he returned, upon closer inspection, he decided, it's going to be very costly to restore. So he sold it to the Kennedy Galleries for a modest figure. And months later, there was an article and a picture of it in Antique Magazine, and it was declared a great discovery. And so Mr. Nestle felt, well, at least I rescued it from the junk pile in India. Today, that $7 painting hangs in the green room of the White House. Mr. Conger, who told me this story, said, it is considered the greatest bargain in American paintings in the history of the world. It's a great story. Page 140. So every time I go to the White House and I go into the green room, I think of that wonderful rescue and the story, which is really one of my favorites in all of the book. The Carters also used historical prints for their Christmas cards. The Christmas card in their gift print now was the same, large and small. And this one is entitled The President's House by Cranstone. It was given out in 1979. And over the years, there was a greater need for Christmas cards. During the Kennedy Johnson years, they sent out about 2,000 to 3,000. During the Ford-Nixon years, it was 40,000 to 60,000. And then during the Carter years, it escalated significantly, doubled. Because Mrs. Carter wanted to do something for all of the people who campaigned and worked hard for the president. And so she thought sending them a Christmas card would be like giving them a thank you for your support and for all your work. People love getting a card from the President of the United States, and they were happy to oblige. And so she sent them an official Christmas card. And so the numbers went to 120,000 cards with this print in 1980. Now, Nancy Reagan, she decided that she was going to invite young American artists to paint a scene or a room in the White House for their Christmas card. Jamie Wyeth was the first artist. He was a third-generation artist. He was the first one to get the invite to come and paint a room in the White House. But he didn't want to paint a room like Thomas William Jones, who painted 4 rooms in the White House from 1985 to 88. In fact, he also painted the cover of my book when I wanted to have it changed. Jamie Wyeth came to the White House to get inspired, and he was allowed to do whatever he wanted to do, which is very freeing for an artist to not be, so tied into something specific. And what he saw was that the executive mansion was more than a museum. It was the president's home. We tend to forget that the first family actually lives there. And they prepare for Christmas late at night, just as we do. And so he decided to be instructive and do something different, to symbolize by a single light that this is Christmas Eve at the White House. So during the summer, he literally sat out on the lawn. He began to sketch the White House and put it under a blanket of snow and a starry sky. The light shone from just one room in the White House. And then his brush, he cast a spell of indigo over it all, and it took Hallmark 8 separations to get the color right with the dark purple. When he showed it to the Reagans, she got it. She said, "It looks like everyone else has gone to bed on Christmas Eve, and there I am wrapping presents and doing the things that we all do on Christmas Eve." Well, 3 years later, he came back and he painted another exterior, Christmas morning, which features, and you can't really see them, you just have to kind of imagine that there are tiny squirrel steps, footprints going up to the north portico. I never liked that card. And I told Ron, we don't need too many of those, don't buy them. Until I talked to Mrs. Reagan. And the story that she told me about President Reagan and the squirrels was very endearing. And so I love that card now. That's on page 167. Now, animals and pets have always found a place at Christmas in the White House. Barbara Bush, when they went to the White House, she invited an interior designer by the name of Mark Hampton to help her freshen up the residence and redecorate the president's office. President Herbert Walker Bush knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted a new blue rug with a gold seal. And so Hampton installed new curtains, he recovered some chairs, he changed the sofa, and he gave the president his new blue rug. Now, when he was finished, he presented a watercolor of the room, complete with a Christmas tree covered with cookies that their personal housekeeper makes, so the president could hand out Christmas cookies when someone visits him in the Oval Office. And the first family had asked him if he would make a drawing for them so that they could use it for a Christmas card of the Oval Office. And Barbara Bush knew what she liked too. By the way, on the day before Thanksgiving, 1995, I picked up the phone and the voice said, "May I speak to Mary Seeley? This is Barbara Bush." Her secretary wouldn't give me an interview, but Barbara Bush wanted to check it off of her list of things to do. And so she told me that, Mark sent us this most marvelous painting for us to approve. And there in the middle of the rug was Millie, sprawled out, resting. And George felt, and I did too, that when you send Christmas greetings to kings and queens, you don't want a dog in the picture. And so he was asked to paint another rendering of that Oval Office. And when I spoke at the Bush Library, I just had to see that picture of Millie on the rug, and they had both of them in their private quarters in the Bush Library. Well, the Clintons made a significant change to Christmas card art. Mrs. Clinton wanted to also showcase the house, but she was partial to a contemporary artist by the name of Thomas McKnight. They owned one of his paintings, they loved his work, so they invited him to paint the Red Room in 1994 for their Christmas card. They had posed the year before, kind of getting a late start. They'd posed themselves in the state dining room with some Christmas decorations. Now, Thomas McKnight has a very recognizable style, incorporating things like you would read in Goodnight Moon. In each of his paintings, he also took artistic license and moved things around. He skewed the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial to be seen out of the window. He replaced 19th century paintings with a portrayal of himself with his wife's dog walking along the rolling hills of Middletown. And above the fireplace, he made a fanciful image of the White House. Now, traditionally, there had never been a Christmas tree in the Red Room, but he added one, and under it, he put a new saxophone for the president, a sled for Chelsea, and on the side table, he placed a tea set for Mrs. Clinton. Under the chair, he caught socks napping and hung 3 stockings by the fireplace with care. His art was reproduced on 250,000 Christmas cards. Now, one tends to think of the White House as being a traditional home, but McKnight's work was creative and contemporary, and the next year he painted the Blue Room, followed by the Green Room. You see, each administration makes personal choices that are unique and interesting and really indicative of who they are. I think one of the most interesting stories about an artist who painted for the president was the story of Adrian Martinez, and I interviewed about 22 artists. As a child, he grew up in a neighborhood just a few blocks from the White House. He told me, I was a walking kid, and I must have walked past that house 10,000 times. And he had memories of large black cars going through those imposing iron gates at the White House. He lived near the National Gallery of Art and the Smithsonian. They became his second home, so he had developed a love of art. It got him a job in Texas, and there he learned to paint. Well, fast forward to 2001. Mrs. Bush, Laura Bush, knew about his artistic abilities. One of his paintings hung in the governor's mansion where they lived in Texas. The Bushes bought it for their ranch, and so Mrs. Bush asked him to return to Washington to paint their first Christmas card. And she said, he almost wept when I first met him. Here he was in this beautiful house to create a painting for the President of the United States. Mrs. Bush didn't give him any guidelines. She had confidence in his abilities. And all the time, he kept thinking about going back to his roots, the days of his non-affluent childhood, the memories of him being on the outside. And he recalled now riding in a big black car, going through those imposing gates to meet the First Lady. It was very emotional for him. The mystery was gone. Here he was on the inside rather than looking from the outside. And he was treated with respect. Only in America could such a dream come true. Well, George and Laura Bush loved his work. They added a personal sentiment and a scripture that had special meaning after 9/11. Now, scripture had become the Bush's signature touch. This was not a knee-jerk to 9/11. They had added scriptures when Governor Bush was in Texas, and they continued that tradition as president in the White House. So in 2004, the Bushes had a bid for re-election, and like Mrs. Carter, there were more Christmas cards than ever that were needed to thank the supporters. Hallmark printed more than 2 million Christmas cards and 11,000 gift prints in 2004. By the end of their administration in 2008, it went down to about 1.2 million. But to my knowledge, presidential Christmas cards had reached their peak with 2 million. Now, to reinforce the importance of presidential Christmas cards was a case in point during the Obama's first term. They had this very beautiful, formal, eloquent Christmas card design with a gold embossed presidential seal on the front. And Politico, made a note of a problem that they had, that they didn't print enough cards. They reported that a number of Obama's major donors were upset because they didn't get a Christmas card that first year. And so the person responsible for the Christmas card project was relieved of her position. Another change that was noted with the Obamas was the traditional gift print that had been given to their staff since the Hoover administration. Every year they would give a frameable, large gift print, is what we call it, that they could hang on their wall. But with the Obamas, 6 of the 8 years, the gift print was missing. Now, traditions can be broken, and the decision for change are the prerogative of every administration. Now, while Barbara and George Bush decided not to include a dog on their Christmas cards, Barack and Michelle Obama decided to include their pets on 5 of their 8 Christmas cards. In fact, in 2012, Michelle Obama held a nationwide art contest. 80 artists competed for the prize of creating an art for the Obama's Christmas card. And so Larissa Cabell of Des Moines, Iowa, designed this winning image, a bow wrapped with a festive scarf romping through new fallen snow on the south lawn with the White House in the distance. This bodacious card was sent to members of Congress, government officials, governors, ambassadors, heads of state around the world, political supporters, family, and friends. Christmas at the White House reflects the personal preference of the first family. There's no right or wrong. The Obamas loved their beau, and Mrs. Obama was quoted as saying, "He is the most important member of the family, and the president knows it." Well, Donald Trump preferred Merry Christmas over Happy Holidays. In fact, as candidate Trump, he campaigned on bringing back the beautiful phrase, Merry Christmas. He says, people don't say it anymore. It's always Happy Holidays. I love Christmas. And if I'm elected, you are going to hear and say Merry Christmas again. And sure enough, as president, Donald Trump turned the holiday card into a Merry Christmas card. Inside of his eloquent embossed white and gold card was a simple message, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And their commemorative gift with a gold foil embossed seal of the president incorporated the same element as their Christmas card. Not since George and Barbara Bush had there been a reference to Christmas on the official card. It was always a holiday card. Well, at the lighting of the National Christmas Tree on November 30th, 2017, President Trump said, "Today's the day I have been very much looking forward to all year long. It is one that we have heard and we speak about and we dream about, and now as President of the United States, it is my tremendous honor to finally wish America and the world a very Merry Christmas." He repeated the greeting on his Christmas Day pre-recorded message, and he closed by saying, "On behalf of Melania, myself, Darren, and the entire Trump family, God bless you. God bless America, and have a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Their last year's card, it was a rich green and gold card, bore the same sentiment, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And this year, with a flag on their card and their gift print, I suspect it has not changed. And so Ron and I wish you the same, a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We thank you for coming out on this evening to hear my story about nearly a century of Christmases at the White House. Thank you. This was last year's 2018. It was a red and green. It was the year when people talked about the red Christmas tree. You know, it was last year's. And this is the cross hall in the entry to the White House. Is that what your question was? Anyone else? Yes. I'm trying to think of the times that we've been there. It doesn't often, it doesn't always snow in Washington, D.C., but yes, there are times when they do have a dusting of snow, maybe not a snowstorm at Christmas time, but it makes it quite festive.
Is there an official ornament?
What?
Is there an official ornament of the White House?
Well, there is the White House historical official ornament that has been going on since 1981, starting with Nancy Reagan. But I don't know about all of them. I know that Mrs. Bush had balls made that she gave as gifts, personal gifts. In fact, she invited me to, I make ornaments as well, and she invited me to design a Christmas ball for her one year and told me to do it in lime green. We thought we knew better, so we made it in a beautiful green, and we lost. We came in second. The lime green won. So anyway, do what the First Lady says. Now, this year with the Trumps, their first year, they've done it for 3 years now. They have made their official family ornament. They only make about 200 of them. They're very beautiful. They're hard to come by, and they're given to, family, or have to be close to them, maybe executive staff. I don't know. But they have a tree. When you go through the White House, you can see it's all covered with just that one ornament. So we're told that they make 200 of them, and they're quite lovely.
What kind of do they do like the Trumps, do they have any kind of like a Christmas celebration or a New Year's Eve celebration, that type of thing, New Year's Day celebration? Do they have anything?
Not New Year's Day. They're in Mar-a-Lago for Christmas. I'm not exactly sure when they leave. But they are in Mar-a-Lago, because I've seen pictures of New Year's, but at Mar-a-Lago. The New Year's Day reception is quite interesting that they carried that on for 130 years.
You showed us all these Christmas trees and things. Do they have any religious nativity items out there, or no?
In the East Room of the White House, it was during the Kennedy administration, a creche was loaned to the White House, and that's why Mrs. Kennedy chose the nativity scene, the creche, for their 1963 Christmas card. It was the first year that they did that. Then with the Johnsons, someone donated a creche, a permanent creche, and it was it's in the White House every year. So it is quite large, and, you know, it's very nice. In the East Room, always. Other than that, and then the scripture that the Bushes chose to put on their Christmas cards are the religious aspects that I can recall.
I have a question.
Yes.
Of all the different interviews that you did, what would be the most unique or interesting one, or a couple of them?
Well, Nancy Reagan was the first one that I had. So I worked with the curator at the White House, Rex Scouten, and he was very, very helpful to us. And so he set up that first interview. All of my interviews were by telephone, which I appreciated because I always asked them, can I tape this? It's very important to me to be accurate, and I don't want to tell you what I think they said. I want to report their actual words. And so Nancy Reagan was the first one, so I appreciated that. And Mr. Scouten had said, it's okay to talk to her, you know. Probably the one I'll never forget is Barbara Bush calling me, you know, because I had asked her social secretary, I'd like to interview her. She's so busy, she travels a lot, she probably will not be able to talk to you. So when she called, and of course I recognized her voice, it was unexpected, but, and I didn't really learn a lot, because what I do is I read her book, and I go to all of the, you know, the holiday things and plannings and all of that. She didn't maybe tell me too much new, but it was in her words. And so it's very important that I talk to as many first ladies as I could. Now, when I talked to Mrs. Ford, I was a little embarrassed because she just wanted to keep talking. And I thought, well, I don't want to take up your time. You're the first lady. And you know, she was not in office, you know, at the time. It was later. But I thought, you've answered all my questions, and thank you for your time. But she just kept asking questions, and I ended up sending her some of the Christmas prints that she didn't have for her family, and we had a nice visit. But I thought, but she just kept leading on, so I kept listening and talking to her, which was fun. I think those are key. It was very important, and I didn't start doing any interviews until I had done all my homework. I mean, like I said, I'm a farm girl from Wisconsin. I'm pretty shy normally, and so I wanted to make sure that I knew what I was talking about before I interviewed any first lady. Now, what is neat is I have all of those interviews on tape, and so that's pretty special. Yes?
How did you get started in this type of thing where you're, you know, finding out about Christmas at the White House? What kind of initiated that with you?
You should be talking to the man right next to you. It's my husband. He's a doctor, and he was at a medical meeting in Washington, D.C., working on goose eyes. And he finished all of his work, so he went out walking down Connecticut Avenue and came into a political memorabilia shop. And he asked them, do you have anything, this was in May, do you have anything that pertains to Christmas? And the proprietor went in the back, and he came out with the Christmas card from Nixon. And so we have become, you know, great friends over the years. And so he started collecting. And some collections he bought a lot of. We almost committed him to, we wondered, where are you going with this? So then one day, he had a slow time at the office, and he called the White House. He wanted to talk to the courier. And so actually, the curator called him back, invited us to come. We met with Mr. Scouten about 24 different times. He was very helpful, you know, to us. And you know, he lined up things that I could never have done on my own. So I couldn't have done it without Rex Scouten. And so we asked him questions. There were some cards that don't have a date on it and things. And he was frustrated that, he didn't have the answers, and so he said, someone needs to do the research and set the record straight. And so my husband offered me. I'm a history major. I've never written a book, and we didn't set out to write a book. We set out to research what did we have. And then it just kept going. And I do like research, and here we are, 8th edition. Yes?
Which administration had the greatest number of decorated trees?
Oh, the Eisenhower, probably. I think Mamie Eisenhower had like 52. She liked Christmas, and they could be in the utility room in any place. But I haven't counted, but I know that Mamie Eisenhower had 52. So that's a lot.
In your research, did you come across any other countries that paralleled ours in sending out Christmas cards from the heads of state?
Well, I know that England, has, I guess I wanted to get a Christmas card of Diana. That's the only one we have seen. We don't have one, do we? No, no. But I have not done international Christmas card. I think that more people of internationals are interested in what America does as a president than we are, unfortunately, of what China might do or something like that. Yes?
I know that government employees can invite people to take a tour of the White House at
Uh-huh.
Christmas time.
Uh-huh.
So have you done that every year?
I'm not a government employee, but yes, we have, not every year. We started in the George W. Bush years, or did we go to Reagan? No. I can't remember, but we have on occasion. I was in the White House the year that it was canceled in 2011, but I had worked it out that I could come in and see the decoration. I walked in these rooms by myself. There was no one else in there. And they didn't cancel the music groups. So there was a choir from, a chorus from some school or church or something that was singing in the East Room, but I was there by myself. And there were a few other people, that had gotten in too. Usually I go through the social secretaries, or Mr. Scouten, would get me in, or, any way I can get in. Congressman, I've used a congressman one year. They have tickets.
My son was working in Washington DC at the time, so it was probably in 2004 or 2005. He was able to get tickets to do the White House tour.
Yes.
So we got to go that one time.
We love to go. Last year we were there, and they had to shoo us out because the White House was closing at 8 o'clock or so, because we love to be there, and we take pictures, and we go through once, and then we kind of head back and take more pictures, and it's a wonderful thing to do if you can do it. We will miss it this year, but our daughter is going on the 13th for her birthday. She got tickets, and we'll see her pictures. Yes?
I'm assuming all the trees are real trees. Is there a specific variety that's favored by those presidents, or
Oh.
species of tree, or no?
No, there is a contest among tree growers that, they bring in. These are real trees. I have artificial trees at home because I decorate in October. But in the White House, they're real trees. And they have a contest for the Tree Growers Association. And they could come in from Wisconsin or Colorado or Pennsylvania or, different. And I don't know about the variety of evergreen that they bring in. I don't know that. Yes?
Do you or your husband have a favorite piece of memorabilia in your own collection? Or maybe something special?
Well, one of the last piece, I think, that Ron bought was Chester A. Arthur is a very, he didn't do a lot of written things, signed things. It's very rare. And we have a letter from Chester A. Arthur, which a collector said was really good. But he just bought a recent one of a check that was written to myself on Christmas Eve during his administration. That was his last thing. It was not my favoriteest thing. I don't know what my favorite is. Yeah, I think Ron's favorite artifact is we have a Abraham Lincoln telegram that was sent to well, it was instructing the people at this prison to release a certain young man to his parents on Christmas Eve. And we love that piece because it shows the heart of the president. First of all, this father and mother, or this father was also an attorney, and they were kind of on opposing sides. And so for him to go out of his way to release this young man and send him home to his parents for Christmas from Lookout Point prison, which had very bad, conditions. We just thought this is really very showed his humanity. So we like that. I mean, we have our earliest piece goes back to James Madison, and we don't have everything from James Madison, but from Coolidge forward, we do have every year. But we always learn of something new. Yes?
Last question.
Okay?
Which administration had the best outdoor nativity scene?
I don't think any of the White House, but on the ellipse during the tree lighting ceremony, there was a time, I think during the Nixon administration, when they had live nativity, but it was around that period of administrations that they did have live nativity, and then it was abolished. It could have been with Ford or Nixon. It seems to me it was that period of time. But the White House as such does not have a live nativity. Was that your question?
Or even just figurines?
Pardon?
Just figurines? Well,
I didn't hear that comment.
Inanimate object. Does the White House have a nativity scene on the?
Like a wooden one or anything like that?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge.
never?
Never say never.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was a lovely presentation. Thank you. We have a gift for you from the Foundation of Music. Thank you. We invite you to enjoy the reception following. Mary will be out to sign her book.